Hey everybody, welcome to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts, Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that you subscribe and leave a comment or review wherever you listen to this. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, today we're going to jump into our episode. We're talking about the skills of successful entrepreneurs. Create, sell, systematize, lead, and, making these decisions. So in this episode, we're going to explore how to generate strong ideas, sell with confidence, and build strong systems to develop people and to take decisive action. So with that, I want to bring on our co-host, Joseph. Joseph, say what's up and take it away.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So today I wanted to talk about, how, it's starting to get that time of year where, it's going to be the new year soon, Christmas, Thanksgiving, it's all coming up. The end of the year is coming around. So I just wanted to really kickstart any new or future endeavors that everyone listening to this is going to do, right? Maybe you want to start a new business. Maybe you want to make a pivot in your business, whatever the case may be, right? So I wanted to really cover how to ask questions to yourself and to others. That way you can really create a good business model or product model or whatever the case may be, but just like some helpful steps for you to do. That way you can again kickstart your future project.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're calling that entrepreneurial thinking through better questions. So it's always good at this point in time, of the year. Things kind of tend to slow down. So, it gives you that little time to, see which way you want to progress for the new year. So, yeah, you're right, Joseph, asking, better questions, that improve your internal state, is the best way to do now, so you're not, behind the eight ball, so to speak, as time goes on, because we know that this time is going really fast these days. So, you want to create that better questions, so we're going to go through that, and, help you to like cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset, so you should ask like targeted questions that challenge your assumptions, and reveal like personal blind spots, because a lot of times we don't see those things when you're in the mix and you're doing things. So like now's the time, as things are slowing down with the holidays and so forth, to start to ask those better questions.
Yeah, especially the blind spot thing, right? So kind of, ask yourself things like, if you look at what other industries do, or like, let's say you're trying to model off of Netflix, right? You can ask yourself, what does Netflix miss? And then is that something that you were going to fall into as well, right? So maybe you were thinking about like doing something like Netflix, and then you're like, okay, now that I have a product like Netflix, what does Netflix miss out on? Or what are they missing? And typically those blind spots will kind of will come about because it's like, okay, well, I had a product or service based off of that. And so if I'm going to model myself off of that, I'm going to model myself off of, good habits, or, not the same blind spots, essentially. Or like, always asking yourself, like, am I doing, or like, can I improve this? X, Y, and Z system. Maybe it's like, you want to optimize your delivery of whatever X, Y, and Z, right? So what you could do is ask yourself, like, how can I improve this? Like, just basically asking yourself things. That way, it challenges like how you believe your system should work, but also it will help bring up the blind spots that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the books I would recommend is The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. This talks about putting those systems in place. Sometimes, when you start out, you just hit the road running, you know what I mean? And you can go back and look at this book and use it as a tool, to help as well to put those systems in place. So if you don't have them and you feel like you're always running crazy, maybe that's the question you should ask, like Joseph's saying, what's missing? What's missing from, from this, like Netflix? It's like, okay, I have this product, but what can be better? What's missing? And it'll pop out to you. So, you want to create those better questions, and those questions that you also ask should, should validate the market, if you're starting out, you want to confirm that there's a real market that exists for what you're creating, So these are questions that we have to ask, because a lot of times we think we have, a solution, but it might just be for a small niche of people, you know what I mean? So just like Netflix, back then Blockbuster thought, yeah, right, they'll never take over, we're always going to be around, we own the media market, and all this stuff. Well, the internet changed the game, and there's no longer the other business. So you want to just confirm that market really exists and that it's large enough, because you're going to put a lot of time and energy and effort into it. So this is the time to ask the good questions.
Exactly. Like, for example, if you want to target like women in their 80s who have a cat and a dog, how many people are really fit that demographic, right? So again, like Henry just said, you're going to be putting a lot of time and effort into it. So you kind of want to maximize whatever it is you're doing. And also, ask investor styled questions, right? Okay, how do I get money in? How does the money go out? How quick can I deliver it? How quick can I make it? And how certain am I to do, X, Y, and Z, right? How certain am I to make $1,000 a month? How certain am I to, sell to 500 people? Things like that, right? So kind of like ask yourself these questions, because let's say you're like, okay, well, here's how the money goes in, but I don't really know what I'm going to spend my money on, or like I don't know the X, Y, and Z, or like the full details of my business model. Well, those things are important, because if you're going to approach other people with this, they're going to want to know, okay, well, how do you actually make money? Like, how does the system actually make you money? Whenever you're talking to people, or I want to say high level people, that's kind of what they want to hear about. They don't want to necessarily hear about like what you're saying. They want to know the X's and O's, right? Like, okay, well, that's cool and all, but how are you making money, right? Kind of like Shark Tank, people will go in and they'll have like this whole like narrative and story, and then they're like, yeah, okay, that's cool. How do you make money, right? Because they're an investor, right? They want to know that whatever that they are putting into you, they're going to get it out. So next thing is like ask 7 ready phase questions to really test your idea, right? If you should move forward. So like, what I mean by that is ask yourself these questions before you start really diving deep into like making them, or making the product or service. So like you can ask yourself, what problems does my idea solve? Or what barriers to entry is in the market, right? So maybe you're trying to get into something that's like involving crypto, right? Maybe you're trying to make like an automated brokerage system, off the top of my head. What is like the barrier of entry, right? Do I need to know programming? Do I need to know connections? Do I need to have this lined up? Do I need to have like a lump sum of cash before that? Just ideas that really help you gauge whether your concept is poised for success or requires more refinement.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, it's kind of like the who, what, where, when, and why questions too, apply, because it's like, who you trying to serve, what does your product or service, provide for them, where are they located at? How am I going to find them? You know what I mean? And you got to have a compelling why your service or product, helps these people. So always being ready and having these questions already asked on your end, just makes it that much easier when people do ask, because they will ask, right? And when they know your why and your motive, then they can get behind your model and what you stand for and what your service, provides, or your product, so, and then the next thing is, questions that improve relationships in sales. You know what I mean? A lot of times you might be the best salesperson, but if you don't have a good attitude about it, or you're not, likable, it's hard to make sales. That's just reality. And it's easy to make sales when you have a relationship. It's easy to ask for for referrals when you have a relationship, so asking permission before asking deeper questions to establish trust. That trust comes from creating those relationships, and use open-ended questions to uncover the real needs and decisions that they're going to make to purchase your service or your product. I think that's a lot of times we just want to force things down their throat, and these big companies figured it out, right? Like you have Netflix, you have Spotify. They're not, spamming you or hounding you. It's like, no, we provide a service that, a lot of people want. And that relationship comes, in the form of them delivering a quality service. So that's how you can do it too, So if you're stuck right now, just look at, ask yourself this question: am I, giving good relationship, with my, existing people, and if you're not, then you can start to shape that, for, better, opportunities, so start asking these questions, they're real questions that, if you don't see a lot of people coming to you, maybe there's a reason, so ask yourself that question.
Exactly. And, like Henry just said, a lot of it is relationship building, right? Maybe, let's say you have a client and you do like a very half-assed job, and like maybe, you're kind of rude to them because they're a little bit rude to you. Maybe they rub you off the wrong way. Well, that's you losing out on potential new clients, because let's say someone is like, oh, well, he did a good service, but I didn't really like working with him. That right there can kill your reputation with other people, because it's like, yeah, he gave it to me, or he did this thing for me, or I bought this product, but like, I don't really support who made it or who gave me that service, right? And so like, being able to be very personable, be of service to people. I mean, I'm not a big believer in the customer is always right mentality, but I would say the customer is mostly right, and even if they're not, try to work with them. That's kind of how I approach things. And like, I've had clients where I wasn't too fond of working with them, but they're like, hey, I'll refer my friends to you, just because I'm very attentive. I ask questions, if I'm in a call with someone, I crack jokes, because I've been working with two clients recently. And so, as I'm working with them, as we're tackling problems and all of that, we're in a call. So there's no need to like have a suit and tie all the time with it, And so I kind of want to pivot to just like, the mindset for starting and scaling a project, right? And this is something that I've really been trying to adapt and become, and all of those words, right? So like, it all starts with vision and emotional feel, right? If you don't see where you're going and you don't have the drive or the gas to get you there, you're never going to get there, right? So a lot of this comes from shifting your from failure thinking to success thinking, right? And the way that you can achieve that is through intentional thinking. So instead of being like, oh, I don't know if this will work, I don't know if there's enough people, if you've done all of those steps that we talked about in the previous topic, asking the right questions, building a rapport with people, then it could become, okay, well, these are the things I need to do to get things done, or to achieve my goal, right? So it's a lot more focused and a lot more grounded.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, the mindset, I think, well, we all have the mindset for starting, but it's the scaling part that, is really tough, and that's why I recommend that book, again, the E-Myth, because it's about having those systems in place. That's how you're going to scale, otherwise, you won't never get to that next level, and it also comes from, like, Joseph just said, it's through changing, your thinking process, so, and these are the ways that I've learned, to implement, scaling, and that way everybody knows what happens. Because like when you start out, you're starting out as a solopreneur, but as it starts to grow, you're going to have to bring on other people, other help, and stuff like that. And when you bring those people in, they need to understand your systems and your program. Otherwise, that's what happens to a lot of businesses. They just bottleneck because it's all dependent on that one guy, but he can only do so much, or girl, they can only do so much. So you want to anchor the business in a clear vision of what you want to sell for profitability, and the best way that I've come to understand is to have systems in place, and as one of those components of the system, like we were talking about just a little while ago, is relationships, the thinking, and, having that courage to discover other ways, like there's not just one way to do things. There's a lot of ways to do things. So you have to, there's going to be some trial and error. There's going to be some testing, but, you got to treat when whatever's not working, you got to treat that failure as a discovery tool and not a threat.
Exactly. And I know we say that a lot, but that's, we need to remind everyone that pretty much every episode, it's something that I try to remind myself so often, because, well, I'll speak for myself. My initial instinct is to be like, oh, this isn't working. My product is terrible. My service is terrible. It's you can really default into that frame of thinking. But, if you're like, hey, this is a solvable problem, and if I solve it, my business is going to get better. Like that's a beautiful thing, right? There's beauty in improvement, and that's all it is. Is if you fail or have something to improve on, that's just room for improvement. That's room for your product to get better, right? And so like, test your tools that you have. Test like, for me, right? So like, I make automations for businesses. So, hey, let me test all of my automations to be like, okay, if I actually give it to a customer, will all of my automations work in the way that I want them to? And are they even relevant to a customer, right? I can make an automation that works, but does it actually do what I want it to do for the client, right? Test out your processes, right? Maybe you have like a specific method for client outreach or client acquisition. Really go in and be like, okay, well, is there a leak in my funnel? Can I improve my funnel? How can I drive more attention to my product or service? All of these things. That way you can really build courage, because it's like, okay, well, I've looked at what mental blocks do I have. I've looked at all the failures and potential room for improvement that my business has. It's only going to improve. It's only going to get better, right? And it's through small iteration, right? And you have to realize that to even do that, you have to make the first step, right? You're never going to be able to get to that improvement phase or the testing phase if you never do the join phase or the start phase, right? And that's something that I've really, really, again, this whole year have been focusing on is, okay, don't even think about it. Just start before thinking.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is recognizing that the hardest part is beginning, and moving forward despite the uncertainty. So like, we say here a lot, ready, fire, then aim, so it's like, don't spend too much time if you're starting out a new business this upcoming year. Don't get too caught up in all the, what if this happens? What if that happens? Just start moving forward, and you're going to see, as you start taking the steps one by one, you're going to see what works, what doesn't work. But, the key thing to focus on is like the first sale, because that's going to, like build confidence in you. It's the proof, that a business actually does exist. So like, it's not the dollar amount. If I've always told this to my kids, like, if you can make $1 online, then you can make $1 million, no problem. The hardest one is making that first dollar, So, but like, if you kill that perfectionism early and keep the momentum high, you're going to see success come about. Because if you try to have everything perfect, it's not gonna happen. It doesn't exist. So the road of an entrepreneur, it's a windy road. It doesn't just go straight up. So you're going this way, that way. You have to pivot, you have to change, you have to move, you have to be agile. So it's I think, if anything, the question is, am I agile? Can I do these things? And the answer is yes. But the next question is, am I willing to? So and that's the hardest part, guys. I think it's just moving forward, in the uncertainty.
I agree. And the way to fight that uncertainty is to make like an immediate action plan, right? What can I do for the next week, right? And plan out your week. Okay, this week I'm gonna do like the brainstorming and prototyping. Okay, after I do all of that, the next week after that, then you say, okay, this week I'm gonna do the the building out, right? So again, really structure it. Make small little goals, or like landmarks, I wanted to say, for the path that you're on, right? Hey, instead of trying to go, I'm gonna walk 1 mile, I'm gonna walk 1,000 feet X amount of times, right? So, or 100 feet X amount of times, right? I think that's like 20 times. Anyways, I don't know how much a mile is right now off the top of my head, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Instead of trying to look at the whole, you cut it up into smaller pieces. And also doing market research, right? So if you do market research and really collect the data from potential buyers, you're already ahead of the game, right? Because you have information on your buyers before they even buy. So you could look into their buying habits. Are people looking this up? Are people what are other businesses doing to like get a sale? Okay, well, I could do this a little bit differently. But also you could seek formal and informal or temporary advisors to shorten the learning curve. And I think that's like a very, very underrated thing nowadays. Is we're like, hey, everything is on YouTube, everything is on online. I don't need to hire someone. No, if you hire someone, they're gonna level you up so much quicker, because they're gonna tell you all of their pitfalls, all of their rooms for improvement, and then they're gonna know exactly how to get you where they're at, because they just did that themselves.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. That's what mentoring is all about, guys. It's just finding somebody that's a step ahead of you, and it helps you to get to that next level. So you also want to listen closely to like negative feedback, because it exposes the hidden flaws. Meaning that, sometimes we don't see things, and when they give you the constructive criticism, instead of getting defensive about it, just recognize it and be like, okay, well, how can I make it better? And asking that question right there on the spot from somebody that would give you that negative feedback, you'd be surprised how much you learn. And again, you're creating that relationship where you respect that person because they had enough respect and, to tell you the truth, and it helps. There's been a lot of times that I've been told things, and at first I took it offensive, like, who are you to tell me? You don't know, you hired me, and then I realized like that was kind of like immature of me, so like you hear it twice, 3 times, then there's definitely a problem. So, deal with the issue and you'll see how things just, change. So, we also want to talk, just real quick, building the 5 core essential, skills for entrepreneurs. Create your ideas on demand, and sell effectively and consistently, So what do we mean by that? Is like, you can't do 10 different things, pick the one thing that you're good at, and that's what you want to sell effective and consistently, So I know we have a wide range of ideas, but you want to find the ones that serve the most and are the most effective, and that's going to help you to become very successful, and be the guru of that space.
Exactly. As well as, making systems that support growth, right? If you have no systems, you can't really scale. There's nothing to scale. If it's all like, oh, I just go with the flow, man, that's not going to scale. Also develop high performing team members or people around you, right? Maybe you're a solopreneur, but that doesn't mean that you can't have high level support around you, right? A mentor, or like maybe you go to like a meeting, or like, I'm sorry, a networking event, and maybe you meet people in that industry, right? Develop a high level network. And also just take action, right? The ability to take action without thinking will get you a lot further than the person that's thinking before they even take the first action.
Absolutely, guys. So yeah, with that, guys, again, you just want to take this time at this time of the year to start asking those better questions, that are going to improve your internal state, and get your mindset prepared for the upcoming year. Test the market, see if there's, a real market for what you're looking for. And with today's technology, there's so much data out there that you guys are able to find, the answers, to your business. Obviously, you're starting this business because there is a need. But you got to find the people, so that's the who, what, where, when, and why. You got to find it, ask that, where are your people at, and when you start to come across people, you want to build those relationships, because it's going to increase your sales, and the mindset, for starting and scaling a project, is vision, just having that vision and that clear, goal of what you're trying to accomplish and how it's going to help people, and learn from your mistakes. That's what we'll always say here, it's never failure. It's just one way it didn't work, but try another way, so keep going, keep moving forward despite your uncertainty, and learn from it, guys, and again, like Joseph said, look for a mentor, join groups, communities, that think alike, so, and use this podcast as well as other podcasts to stay inspired. So with that, I want to bring Joseph back on if he has any other ideas or closing thoughts before we end the podcast.
Yeah. I wanted to, really cover this topic today because, at the time of recording this, we're in November. And if you're following along actively, I personally like to get ahead of my goals, right? Even though we're still in 2025, 2026 is around the corner, right? So, if we start planning and sketching and doing all of these things before the new year, we'll start ahead of people who just started on January 1st. And with that, I kind of want to, again, give a shout out to our community. Like Henry said, we have this podcast, but we also have a community for entrepreneurs tired of doing everything alone. We have a community support as well as self-growth tools and weekly structure to help you stay focused and follow through with whatever you're trying to do. So that's at backtobrilliance.com. If you scroll down to our community tab, you'll be linked up with like-minded people like you.
Well said. All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning into our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment or review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're out. Till the next time, stay blessed.
Bye-bye.